My name is Miriam Ezra. I am Jewish, born in Jerusalem, but my life has taken me to Tehran, Iran, where I live with my husband and our 2 young children. I speak to you not as a preacher, nor as an attention seeker. I speak as a witness. What I saw on the other side is not a metaphor, it is not a symbol. It is a warning, an urgent call. It all began on a silent dawn. The air seemed charged with something invisible, as if the world had held its breath. Suddenly, a flash, a tear in the sky, so white and so absolute that it erased for an instant everything that existed, and with it came a silence. But not just any silence. It was a silence that screamed, a silence that made the heart stop in fear. I stood under that torn sky, and something inside me knew. This was no dream. It was as if my soul had been pulled out of time. I saw cities, oh my God, entire cities being engulfed in fire in seconds. First, it was Damascus, then Tel Aviv, New York, Paris. The explosions were not ordinary airstrikes. They were mushroom clouds of fire, like the ones I'd seen in the history books about Hiroshima. But now, there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and all at once. The world moved on, distracted, as if dancing on a minefield. And then I heard a voice, not with my ears, but inside my spirit. It said, "Judgment has already been sown. Now it blooms." I fell to my knees, or rather, my consciousness fell. There was no ground, but I felt prostrate. An immense pain pierced my chest, not physical, but existential. It was the cry of the earth. It was as if the entire planet were crying. And even in this landscape of ruin, there was a small flame of hope. It was like a living ember, hidden among the spiritual rubble. The voice returned more gently. "There is still time, but time is short. Cry out, awake, intercede." Those words cut me deeper than any knife. I felt like everything I had known, my life, my home, my identity, had been ripped away for me to see this, for me to go back and tell it. I know this sounds insane. I know many will doubt, laugh, or call me a fanatic, but I cannot remain silent. What I saw was real, more real than this chair where I sit now. What is coming is not just a probable future. It is a future already visible in the spiritual world. And the only thing that can prevent it from coming true is a true cry, a deep repentance, a sincere vigil. Every awakened heart counts. I speak to you not because I want you to believe me, but because if you would just consider this to be true, maybe, just maybe, we can avoid the worst. I used to think I had a hard life. Being Jewish in Iran was not easy, even in times of relative peace. My husband, Eliyahu, worked in a small artisanal bakery in the Darvaze neighborhood. He left every morning before sunrise and came back exhausted, smelling of flour and with sweetness in his eyes. Our children, Avi and Leah, were 5 and 3. We lived in a small apartment on the 3rd floor, where the sound of the call to prayer mingled with the sounds of the market. The night before the explosion, there was no sign, no alarm, just a strange feeling in the air, as if the world were holding its breath. Eliyahu woke up before me, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I'm going to get some bread. Don't take the kids out. I heard some bad rumors last night." I mumbled something and went back to sleep. That was the last time I heard your voice. Less than 30 minutes later, the sky opened with a deafening roar. Windows shattered. The building shook. I grabbed my children and ran downstairs, still in my pajamas, my feet bleeding from stepping on broken glass. When I reached the street, I saw black smoke rising like a snake, not far from where the bakery was. Eliyahu never returned. That day, everything came crashing down, not just the building or the streets, but my entire life. We were taken to a makeshift shelter in a bombed-out school. The children's desks were stacked to make beds. The smell of mold, sweat, and fear was suffocating. There was no drinking water. Food? Just bulging tin cans handed out by hurried soldiers. But the worst part wasn't the hunger. It was the absence. I waited every day to hear familiar footsteps. I waited for a miracle. I waited for someone to say, "He survived. He was just wounded. He's coming. But no one did. No one came. Only the news, growing more and more grim. Tehran was being surrounded. Other cities had already been wiped off the map. Leah got sick. She had a high fever. I had no medicine. I soaked cloths with the little water I could find and prayed. Avi, who was older, asked, "Mommy, did Daddy go to heaven to get bread?" I didn't know what to say. Everything we had built, every savings, every dream, every plan to give our children a better life, turned to dust in a single morning. But even amid the ruin, there was something burning inside me. A voice that was faint but constant. "You are still alive for a reason." I didn't understand which one. I just felt pain. But it was there, at the bottom of that abyss, that my journey began. A journey that would take me beyond death. But before that, I needed to learn how to survive, even for no apparent reason. In that makeshift shelter, each second seemed like an eternity. The walls of the school, marked by shrapnel and soot, seemed alive. They creaked, groaned, cried with us. There were dozens of women like me, each with their children, their losses, their silences. Some murmured in languages I didn't understand. Others simply stared into space, with eyes that seemed to have died inside. I couldn't afford that luxury. Leah was burning with fever. Avi was crying for food. And Eliyahu wasn't there. I needed to get out, to find water, bread, anything. But outside, there were bombings, hostile soldiers, desperate men, and I, a woman alone, a foreigner, a Jew. I knew I could count on no one. So I relied on what had grown up with me since I was a little girl, the Psalms. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? I whispered as I walked through broken corridors, jumped over rubble, and dodged bodies. Prayer became my invisible shield. Every step was covered with verses, as if ancient words had become armor. I didn't just pray with my mouth. My soul cried out, groaned, pleaded, "Deliver me, O God, from those who persecute me. Be my rock, my fortress." I repeated this, even when I didn't feel faith, even when all that was left was the echo of hope. Other women watched me. Some whispered to each other. One of them, named Azar, stopped me one day. She held my hand tightly and said, "Where does that peace in your eyes come from? You lost your husband, your baby is sick, and yet you go out there, as if you're not afraid." I cried, not because I had an answer, but because I saw myself. I saw how I was, and I didn't recognize myself. But maybe that strength wasn't mine. Maybe it was his. In that shelter, each woman fought in her own way, some with screams, others with silence. I fought with psalms, with each word that reminded me that I was not alone, and above all, with the image of Avi and Leah waiting for me. Every time I went out in search of something, it was like crossing a valley of death, but prayer made me invisible. The soldiers ignored me. The explosions happened far away. Someone even commented that I seemed to have strange luck, but it wasn't luck. It was clamor. One morning, when the sun had not yet touched the school walls, I found a small basket behind an overturned car. Inside it were 3 loaves of bread and 2 bottles of water. I don't know who left them there, but I took them as if they were gold. I fed my children and shared them with Azar. And that night, for the first time, Leah slept without a fever. It was then that I understood. Prayer was not just comfort, it was survival. It was strategy. It was spiritual resistance. It was the bridge that supported me over the abyss. That morning began like every other since the beginning of the war, with the sound of gunshots in the distance and the smell of smoke invading everything. I no longer felt the same fear. The body gets used, in a sick way, to the idea of death lurking around. There was only one mission left, to keep my children alive. Avi slept holding my arm. Leah, weaker, was still fighting the fever. I knew I had to go out again. The bread was gone. The water, almost gone. Before leaving, I knelt between them. I prayed Psalm 91 all the way through. Each word felt like a shield, even if invisible. I kissed my children's foreheads and whispered, Wait for me. I'll be back." Then I left. The school hallways were emptier that day. Some families had fled. Others hadn't. Outside, the sky was covered in a yellow haze. The sickly air burned my lungs. I walked past wrecked cars, fallen utility poles, and the shards of broken lives, and I kept praying. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. It was in that prayer that I felt a pressure in the air, a strange, heavy, absolute silence. The birds stopped. The sounds ceased. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then it came. A flash. Not like the first one I'd seen in the vision. This one was smaller, closer, but no less terrifying. The sound. I didn't hear it, because before I could register anything, my body was thrown back like a leaf. A hot, fierce light cut through everything. But there was no pain. Nothing. Just a sigh. As if the world had expired. As if my soul had been breathed out of my body. I floated for a moment. I saw my body lying among the rubble of an old market, my arms spread out, blood on my face, and an expression of calm that frightened me. I thought, I'm dead. But I also thought, so that's how it is. There was no fear. There was no despair. There was only silence. A silence so deep it seemed to have weight, and within it, a strange peace. It wasn't the peace you feel when everything is fine. It was something else, as if a presence was surrounding me, telling me without words, "You are not alone." I looked around, expecting to see something. Angels, doors, a light, but there was only emptiness. And in the void, something began to be born. A light in the distance, pulsing, alive, as if it were breathing. I was drawn to it, effortlessly, like a leaf being carried by the breeze. I didn't know what awaited me. I only knew that everything had changed. My body lay silently among the rubble of the earth, but my soul was about to cross over into the invisible. When I was pulled into that light, there was no tunnel, no rush. It was as if time had stopped. Everything around me was bright, but not blinding. It was warm, but not burning. The light seemed to breathe. Yes, it was as if it had a life of its own, a pulse, a consciousness. It was not just a landscape. It was a being. I walked, or perhaps floated, through this desert of light. The word desert is the best I can think of, because there was vastness there, but there was no solitude. It was silence, but not the silence of death. It was the silence of reverence, like when you enter a very ancient temple, and even the air feels sacred. Soon, I noticed two presences in front of me. One was an old man. His face seemed carved by eternity. Every wrinkle told a story. He didn't speak, but his eyes pierced everything in me. The other figure, my heart stopped, or sped up. I don't know. I recognized him. I had never seen him with my own eyes, but I knew who he was. Jesus. Yes, I am Jewish. I grew up hearing that he was not the Messiah, that he was just a twisted prophet, an ordinary man. But there, in that place where there is no lie, I knew he was real. And he knew me. He approached me with a compassion that dismantled me. He didn't say welcome or quote scripture. He simply touched my shoulder. And in that touch, an avalanche went through me. In an instant, I relived all the pain I had buried. The suppressed scream when Eliyahu did not return. Leah's feverish eyes. Avi's footsteps following me through the corridors of the shelter. I relived the fear, the hunger, the despair, the hatred of being alone in a country where my faith was forbidden. Everything exploded inside me, and I cried. I cried with my body and soul. A cry that does not wet the face, but washes existence. Jesus said nothing. He just placed his hand on my chest, and I felt something I had never felt before. The certainty that everything I had experienced had not been ignored, that not a single tear had been wasted, that I was known, deeply known. The elder then raised his arm and pointed to a more distant point in that desert of light, and with a firm but tender voice, he said, "It's not over yet. You'll see." It was as if I had been called here not to rest, but to see, and what I was about to see would change everything, not just my life, but my understanding of the world, of war, of existence. I was beyond death, but more alive than ever, and something great was approaching. Led by the two figures, I was lifted to a height in that dimension that seemed alive. The landscape of light gave way to something even vaster, a space where planet Earth was visible, floating before me like a wounded jewel. It was not a symbolic vision. I saw the world as it is, spinning, pulsing, breathing, but also sick. A sadness came over me. It wasn't my own. It was as if it came from the earth itself, an ancient lament, a deep weariness. I saw red lines crisscrossing continents like inflamed, burning veins. And then the vision began. First, I saw Damascus, a flash. A second later, ruins, bodies, dust. The city was wiped out in an instant. Then Baghdad, another flash, the same destruction. The images came like a thunderclap. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Paris, New York, a series of explosions, as if the heavens had spat fire on men. I saw missiles leaving hidden platforms in Russia, submarines in the China Sea, secret bases in Iran. I saw North Korea launch a series of warheads. The world was no longer at war. It was in an extermination. There were no more armies fighting armies. There were populations being wiped out, children, the elderly, pregnant women. I saw schools, hospitals, temples, all engulfed in flames. And then I heard, "The war has begun in the invisible." The earth wept, and I wept with it. What shook me most was not the destruction itself, but the coldness. The men who pressed the buttons had no faces. They were shadows, soulless, like puppets. Human life had lost its value. Power had become the only god. But even there, in the glare, I saw something. Points of light, tiny but steady. They were like candles burning in the midst of a hurricane. And a voice inside me whispered, "Hope still lives, but it is surrounded." The image then zoomed in. I saw fields burning, rivers drying up, people migrating en masse, not knowing where to go. The chaos was not just nuclear, it was climatic, political, spiritual, a total collapse. But it was not caused by chance. It was as if someone had orchestrated it all. A script of destruction executed with precision. My spirit trembled, and I said, in a weak voice, "Is it too late?" The elder replied, "Not yet, but almost." And in that moment, I understood that what I was seeing was not a possibility. It was a route, a road already underway. Destruction was no longer a threat. It was a reality being prepared, and the world slept. As I watched the earth spin before me, shrouded in destruction, something changed in my vision. The surface of the planet darkened, as if a spiritual fog had covered it. The lights of the cities disappeared, and in their place I saw something I had not expected. Figures, many, moving among the buildings, palace corridors, meeting rooms, TV studios, universities, government offices. But these figures were not human. They were entities, shadows with shapes that defied logic. Some seemed to be made of living smoke. Others had eyes like burning coals, and they were all whispering, not with audible words, but with intent. I saw one hovering over a president's desk, whispering insistently in his ear. Another danced on a television tower, whispering through the airwaves. And yet another knelt before a group of young people, inserting lies into their thoughts. And I understood. War was not born in missiles. It was born here, on this invisible plane. War was not between nations, but between kingdoms. Then I heard the names of these entities: pride, revenge, deceit, control. Each one of them disguised itself as ideology, patriotism, justice. But deep down, it was all a lie, an invisible plot woven together centuries, perhaps millennia, ago. The leaders of the world were just pawns, puppets, and we, the people, a blind mass being led into the abyss. The most terrible of these entities walked majestically, like a king. He had an almost human appearance, but his eyes were endless abysses. And he smiled. He fed on discord, anger, fear. I saw his name written like invisible fire over the world: lie. And I understood. The enemy's greatest weapon was not destruction, it was illusion. He made the world believe it was at political war, when in fact the war was spiritual. He made people hate each other because of race, religion, politics, while the real enemy remained hidden. Then I saw a battlefield. There were no weapons, only hearts, millions of them. Human hearts being pierced by arrows of doubt, resentment, ambition. And among these hearts, some resisted, enlightened, praying. And there I saw another battle, a war fought in prayer, in moral choices, in acts of silent kindness. And I understood. The human heart is the most important battlefield in the universe. It is not tanks, nor treaties, that will decide the fate of the world, but what happens inside each human being. Every thought cultivated, every forgiveness offered, every lie rejected, every truth embraced. The war we see is just the shadow of the war that really matters. In the midst of that apocalyptic scenario, where shadows manipulated the earth's destinies, something began to change in the vision. Like a gentle breeze that arrives before the rain, points of light appeared, small at first, fragile, like fireflies on a dark night. But soon, they began to grow, and with them, something profound manifested itself. These points of light did not come from governments or from golden temples. They appeared in unlikely places, humble homes, shacks, prisons, hospitals. They were men and women, some with Bibles in their hands, others with their eyes closed and tears streaming, in prayer. But these were not ritualistic prayers. They were cries, cries of the Spirit, pleas on their knees on the ground, prayers without words, but full of truth. And then I saw, each sincere prayer created a golden thread that rose to heaven and came back down to earth, connecting with other threads. Before long, a network began to form, a living web of light, woven by people no one knew, but who touched God's heart with their faith. This net spread, and wherever it passed, the shadows retreated, the spiritual entities trembled, their whispers fell silent, and I saw something even more shocking. Some of these shadows fell, as if prayer weakened their power, as if intercession were more powerful than any bomb. Jesus stood beside me and spoke, not with his mouth, but within me. The prayers of the humble sustain the world. That cut me to the quick, because I never imagined that the whispered words of a desperate mother in a shelter or a lonely old man in his bed could be as effective as military decisions. But it was true. I had seen battles won in silence, families protected by a single prayer said in faith, nations avoided destruction because of a small group, kneeling in secret. And I realized something terrible and at the same time hopeful. Judgment was not absolute. It could be stopped, not by weapons, not by treaties, but by sincere repentance, by genuine cries, by anonymous intercessors who carried the weight of the world on their knees. God's wrath was real, but his love was even more so. He did not want to destroy, he wanted to awaken, and prayer was the bridge between judgment and mercy. I saw children praying, I saw prisoners praying, I saw atheists who had never bent their knees, crying over something they could not explain. And each of these prayers was an act of war against darkness. The earth was not completely lost. There were still warriors, not with swords, but with tears, not with power, but with brokenness. And that could still change the ending. After everything I had seen, the destruction, the entities, the prayer network, something changed inside me. It wasn't just a feeling. It was as if a responsibility had been planted in the center of my being. Jesus and the elder looked at me with an intensity that made my spirit tremble. And then I understood. I hadn't been taken there to die. I had been taken to see. And now, I would have to speak. I heard the words clearly. You will be a trumpet, not to frighten, but to awaken. That sentence burned inside me like fire. Then I saw a book being opened before my eyes. Its pages were alive, pulsating. Written within were the lies that shaped the world. I saw how the truth had been diluted amid carefully constructed narratives. Schools taught half-truths. The news diverted our attention from the essential. Social media entertained the mind while the spirit sickened. And the worst part, many preferred it that way. I saw men and women choosing deception because it was comfortable, because telling the truth was costly, because opening one's eyes required sacrifice. The elder's voice echoed, "Lies are the language of the enemy, but even a whisper of truth can shake kingdoms." It was then that I saw my own face, me, walking back into the shelter, not as someone broken, but as someone marked, carrying a mission, a message that needed to be said, even if no one wanted to hear it. You saw it. Now you must announce it. I wasn't chosen because I'm special. I was chosen because I survived, because I've been through the fire, because I know pain, and pain becomes authority when it's crossed with faith. What I thought was my end was actually the beginning of a calling. I saw people listening to my story. Some mocked, others cried, some stood up in prayer, others rejected me with hatred, but no one remained indifferent, because the testimony carried spiritual weight, because my words were loaded with what I had seen, and no one could deny the sparkle in the eyes of those who had been on the other side. I understood that I didn't need to convince anyone. The truth, when spoken with love and urgency, would find its way. My mission was not to save the world. It was to light torches in the darkness, to warn, to cry out, to awaken those who still have ears to hear. That was why I was brought back. The world is heading quickly towards the abyss, but there is still a chance, and it lies in bended knees, in broken hearts, in the courage to speak even when everything tells you to keep quiet. I would go back, and I would tell everything, not as a survivor, but as a witness, as a sentinel, like someone who saw it and can no longer keep quiet. The light around me changed once more. Like a curtain being pulled back, the dark scene of destruction and deceit fell apart before me. In its place, something new appeared, unexpected, a vision so intense that my spiritual knees buckled without me even realizing it. It was a crowd, thousands, perhaps millions of people, of all races, languages, ages. They wore simple clothes, but their faces, oh, their faces. They were lit up with a joy that did not come from this world. They sang, but it was not just music. It was worship, a surrender that came from deep within. All were turned toward a central light, not the sun, but something purer, the presence of God. And there, among those faces, I saw the impossible. Eliyahu, my husband. He was smiling, he was whole. And when our eyes met, it wasn't surprise. It was recognition. He knew, and I knew his death was not in vain. He too had gone through the pain, the fire, the surrender, and now he was part of the awakened. I saw others. I saw Azar, the woman from the shelter. I saw children who had left. I saw anonymous people who somehow heard the testimony, mine and others, and they woke up. They shook off their spiritual slumber. They began to pray. They cried out. They resisted deception with truth. I saw entire communities coming together, not in religion, but in spirit. But then, I also saw those who were sleeping, people with their eyes closed, even in the light, hearts too busy, minds distracted by the vanities of the world. Some were religious, others skeptical, but all were indifferent. And I heard, "There is still time. Not much, but there is." That sentence rang like a bell, a final warning. War was not inevitable, but it was coming. Judgment was not irrevocable, but it was ready. The choice was collective, but it began with the individual. Every awakened soul counted. Every sincere prayer was one less brick in the wall of destruction. And then, like a whisper of wind, I felt myself being returned. The vision began to fade. The sound grew distant. The light receded, and one last word was given to me, imprinted on me like fire. Live and tell. I woke up under the rubble. The sky was still gray. The smell of smoke was still real, but my body was breathing. And amidst the rocks and the pain, there was a certainty in me stronger than death. My life is now a mission. Every person who crosses my path will hear this story, not so they can believe me, but so that maybe they will wake up. Not everyone will hear it, but those who do will have a chance. And sometimes, a chance is all God needs to change a destiny. I saw what was coming, and I can't live like before anymore.